All right, we are back at Big 12 Insiders with another edition of our fall preview. Today, we're previewing Kansas State, one of the top picks to win the Big 12 Conference this year. We got Ryan Wallace from GoPowerCat.com here today with us. Ryan, how is it going, my man?
It's good, man. Football season's here, Brian. You can smell it. You can feel it in the air. This is like my favorite time of year. The end of
Yeah,
August when you can it's like right around the corner.
absolutely. I can't wait. It's been a long summer, it seems like. I thought the Olympics, Ryan, would help. It didn't. I think it's the time difference and all. It just didn't help. I'm like, oh, my goodness, let's
Right.
get here. But you know what? We can all relax because it is here. So let's get into this a little bit. So K-State, like I mentioned, is one of the teams that not only that everybody is picking to be one of the top teams in the league. A lot of times, Ryan, and I find it a little interesting because when you have a new quarterback, technically a new offensive coordinator, the kind of holes that they have to fill on the offensive line, stuff that they're losing, it's very rare that a team like that coming into the season is picked to be this good. What's going on? What's different about this K-State than maybe other teams across the country where this would be happening with?
Well, probably twofold. I think one is not all that, it's a lot. It's pretty similar to what we saw with Bill Snyder in the sense of, I think it just goes to show the amount of respect that is shown to this coaching staff. And again, similar with Bill Snyder, I think people just trust that Coach Kleiman and his group are going to be able to get those players and those certain position groups, like you mentioned. We'll touch on Connor Riley in the offensive line group. I think he's earned the reputation as a guy who can be trusted to develop that. Right. That they're just going to get guys ready to go, and they'll be ready come the season opener. And I think probably the second part of that is I think people are starting to buy in and witnessing to the talent influx that's coming in to Kansas State. I think we've seen how important that 2023 class has been foundationally. And then again, the reputation that Kansas State has had in the transfer portal, that they're just going to find the right guys and make them work and, get through the non-conference schedule and be ready to go in the Big 12. And Brian, maybe the other part of this is the fact that, the Big 12 is, from a national perspective, kind of looked down a little bit this year. It's like, well, maybe little old K-State can win that little old league. I wonder if maybe it would be different if Texas and Oklahoma were still in this league, if K-State and Utah would still be viewed as strongly and as confidently to be certainly at the top, but in the conversation to win the league. Or is it just because, the quote big boys are no longer in the league? But I think we're seeing a lot of respect shown to Kansas State's coaching staff more than anything else, that they'll have this team ready to go.
Yeah, I sensed a lot of that when I was at Big 12 Media Days. A lot of media members were just really impressed with Coach Kleiman and what they were able to do, the kind of talent that they've been able to bring in, kind of what you mentioned, and just the way that they can prepare and how they play. Kansas State plays a physical style of football. I know they may spread it out, but, when push comes to shove, they're playing physical football, and they've had the offensive linemen to do that. And I think that's something that's going to continue. We'll get into that, and we might as well get into it right now.
Okay.
You touched on Connor Riley as far as the strength of the offense. Look, the skill positions we could talk about forever with, DJ Giddens, obviously starting with Avery Johnson, Dylan Edwards. We can go on and on about that, but they're not going to go anywhere if the offensive line isn't up to snuff. And I think the one thing about it is that some guys that are coming back that maybe they weren't listed as starters played a lot of football last year. That means something. It's not just, hey, they're replacing these guys and the guys behind them, nobody played. These guys actually played a lot of football last year, Ryan.
Yeah, and two, I think some of the guys even behind them on the two deep, or what we're kind of piecing together to be the two deep when you read between the lines, are guys that, Brian, it's not like guys that, someone moved on and so therefore now it's player X, right? I mean, we're hearing, let's take, for example, a guy like Andrew Linegang. Again, like you were saying, a guy who hasn't really seen a ton of action throughout the course of his career, but a guy who they've been praising and lauding since the moment he stepped on campus. Yes, he's had to wait his turn, but I mean, like, had they needed to go to him, I think they would have been comfortable last year going to him and, maybe even pushing him forward as a freshman. They just didn't need to. So
Right.
I think that's important too, when you think not only about guys that haven't just participated on the field, but again, it's not just a guy who, well, it's his turn. He hasn't really done anything for 3 years, but since he's kind of next in line, no, these guys are next in line and they've been, again, earning praise from the coaches for 2 years. Sam Hecht has been a guy who's, I think, going into his 3rd or 4th year in the program, redshirt, sophomore or junior, what have you. And, he's been earning applause from Connor Riley for the better part of a year and a half now. So again, a lot of guys that maybe just haven't gotten their break yet. One thing that I will say, Brian, that is a little interesting to me, again, there are a couple things that you start to piece together from listening to coaches and players and talking to some of the guys on the boots on the ground in Manhattan. Obviously, you and I can't be at practices, but I'm watching the stuff that Fitz and them are videoing, right? And I'm hearing things through the grapevine. And on one hand, it's really solid for the offensive line that it sounds like Connor Riley seems to have about 7 guys that he's really, really confident in already in camp. You would think with the amount that they lost that there might be a little bit more exploration, a little bit more, implementing different rotations and stuff. He seems pretty set, which is a good thing, right? It seems like, okay, we've got 5 that I like and then maybe 2 more. And that's a good rotation as an offensive line. It shows that he's confident in those guys. But the other part that is a little, I don't know if it's concerning to me. Again, you can look at it one of 2 ways. I thought it was really interesting, Brian, that Chris Kleiman talked about in his media availability that if the season were to start right now, they might split snaps at left tackle between Easton Kilty and John Pastore. And so you might look at that and go, well, that's fantastic. That shows that John Pastore has really taken the next step. A guy that, again, they've been singing the praises for since the moment he stepped on campus as a freshman. The other part of that, though, is Easton Kilty was considered a top 3 tackle out of the portal.
Right.
I mean, this was a guy that had like NFL draft written on him. And so, is John Pastore that good, or is maybe Easton Kilty not exactly where they wanted him to be right now? So again, kind of a long-winded answer to the offensive line. I think ultimately it goes back to what we were saying a minute ago. Connor Riley will figure it out, and they've got the pieces in play. But it'll be interesting to see kind of how that takes shape through the non-con. Is it going to be John Pastore? Is it Easton Kilty? Sounds like Kilty's been taking most of the first team snaps. But again, when you've got John Pastore, Andrew Leingang kind of as your 6 and 7 guy, and a guy like Andrew Leingang that has the ability to flex from tackle to center, that's good news. I think Kansas State will figure that out in 1 or 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Kansas State does that not a lot of people do, is they play multiple offensive linemen in game. A lot of people just have 5. This is who we run with. That's what the majority, it's just football in general. But Kansas State has found that it can work some. Maybe they changed that this year. I don't know, but they found a little bit of success in doing that. But again, it helps moving forward because, as we mentioned, they're replacing some starters this year, but these are guys that have played some football. So it's a good thing to have happen. Look, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Avery Johnson and what he is going to bring to the table. For people that don't know, Ryan, what is Avery Johnson going to add to this Kansas State offense, and what can we expect from him and all the skill positions in general this year that maybe we didn't get in previous seasons?
Well, I think definitely it adds an element to the ground game that we haven't seen, Brian, in Manhattan since. Because, I mean, Colin Klein ran the ball, but it was bulldozer-like, right? I don't know if we've seen this kind of running ability. Do you go back to Michael Bishop? I mean, L. Roberson, maybe. Some elements of L there, but Avery is dynamic in ways that I don't even know if L was in terms of his speed. We're talking about a guy that's top 3 to 5, maybe even higher than top 3 in terms of just fastest players on the entire roster. And he's your quarterback. So I think the element that they're going to have, if you're Matt Wells and Connor Riley, you're salivating at what you can do in like an RPO game or any kind of like option type stuff. They've got to love. You're looking at a guy that, again, I think is probably going to surprise some folks that haven't turned his tape on, haven't watched K-State, even last year in games that he got in, with his comfort level in the pocket and his presence. For a kid that, was only a couple games away from preserving a red shirt last season,
right?
He is going to look like a junior or senior back there in the pocket. And, again, maybe some of the Heisman talk is a little premature, but I think, again, it's a nod to not only what Avery is, his talents on the field, but I think up here between the helmet, I think it's, again, just goes to show you how comfortable he is, how used he is and welcoming to the pressure. I think obviously the thing that everybody wants to know and see more from is him as a passer. Didn't get a chance to see a ton of it in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And I think a lot of that had to do, we talked with his quarterback trainer on a podcast that I do on KCSN called Verbal Commitment. Justin Hoover's a guy that works with the Elite 11. He's worked with, Drew Lock, Skylar Thompson, all sorts of guys. And he's Avery Johnson's kind of personal trainer in the offseason, has been since his junior year of high school. And he mentioned to us, a lot of that with the Pop-Tarts Bowl and him maybe running out of bounds, throwing it out of bounds had more to do with, let's not get you hurt and knowing kind of the depth that was behind him. I think we're really going to see the true Avery Johnson here this year because it is going to be a little bit more free. He will take off upfield rather than kind of running out of bounds. He's got more bulk to him, Brien. They've added more muscle mass where he can withstand contact, and he's always been really good, even in the high school level, of knowing how to absorb, knowing how to kind of roll off of contact. I'd be really surprised if he's a guy that gets severely dinged up from a contact kind of injury, outside of, an ankle getting rolled up on or something like that. And again, I think the credit to the strength staff, Coach Drew Carroll and those guys for getting his body ready. But I do think, Brien, that the big question with him is passing the ball. He's not Michael Bishop, at least not yet, right? And doesn't have that kind of cannon for an arm. But I think knowing a little bit of what Matt Wells has done in the past and what Connor Riley wants to do, knowing what they have with DJ Giddens in the backfield and what that ground game can support, he doesn't have to be, Joe Burrow or anything from a statistical standpoint. I think as long as he's efficient and can move the chains, 10, 20 yards, he doesn't have to go above and beyond as a passer. And I think he'll more than fit into that role this season.
Gotcha. So let's move it over to the other side of the football. Kansas State, they lost. It seemed like every time they put a new linebacker in last year, Ryan, somebody got hurt. They were just churning through those things. It was, and for them to still be as productive as they were, to me, it was a testament, kind of what you said, as far as the talent influx of what they got, because, it's not a lot of ball clubs around the country can suffer that kind of damage at the linebacker position and still be good against the run. It's just impossible for that to happen. K-State somehow managed to do that. Moving on to this season, what do you feel like is going to be one of the strengths of the Kansas State defense this year?
I think without a doubt for me, from everything we're hearing, it's got to be the front seven. And that's not taking anything away from the secondary. But, the progress, if you start on the front line, they're going to be more multiple. They've admitted that. We don't know exactly, to what share they're going to be in an odd man front versus a 4-man front, but they're going to be more multiple than they've been in years past and try and throw offensive off that way. But, they've got Uso Samalo, which, that kind of size you can't just find on the street anywhere. And he's pretty athletic for that size too. And they're really happy with where Damian Alalio has come. So you've got 2 quality nose tackles that they feel really good about. And then the influx of talent that they've had at the defensive end position is remarkable. We heard from Buddy Wyatt earlier this week who said that he is very confident that they have a legitimate 3 deep there right now. It's not just a 3 deep on paper. It's a 3 deep where if he had to go to the 3rd string, he's absolutely okay doing so, which is wild. And he was actually talking about maybe a 7th player that is making strides that could be in that mix, say early in the season to midseason. So that's crazy. They've also got, I like at the defensive line position too, that they've got guys that can do a little bit of everything. You've got an experienced guy like Brendan Mott that's really pretty balanced player, knowledgeable. You've got a guy like Cody Stufflebean that's more of a motor guy, a run stopper, but a guy that's played a lot of football. Chidi Obiizor is a guy that is 6'6", Brian, like 280, but obviously plays as an edge, but they can slide him inside. And then they're bringing up these redshirt freshmen in Ryan Davis, that Buddy Wyatt mentioned might be their most talented pure pass rusher right now.
Right.
And Jordan Allen, who's just a freak of an athlete, that again is pretty balanced in what he can do as well. So once those guys get their feet wet, and then behind them, you think about Austin Moore and what he's already proven at the college stage, and a middle linebacker room, going back to what you were talking about in your question, Brian, that they think might be their deepest across the board on defense. Austin Romaine getting his feet wet last year. Again, that 2023 class, there's a guy that was thrust into action, and it's going to serve him well moving forward. He's in there. Alec Marenko is a guy they brought in from New Mexico out of the portal. Not a name that's going to, send shockwaves, nationally or anything, but a guy who's played a lot of football. And when he's healthy, and right now he's still getting back from injury, so that's a big caveat. When he's healthy, has been really productive. Bo Palmer, Asa Newsome, really, really good get that they got out of high school ranks in Iowa, again in the 2023 class. Probably would have played a lot more as a freshman had he not gone down with a season-ending knee injury. He is further along right now than they expected him to be. They're so deep at Mike linebacker, even a guy like Terry Kirksey that played for a really talented junior college program at Hutchinson Community College. He's worked his way up. We were kind of casting him off, Brian.
Right.
And now he's worked his way into the conversation. They're so deep at Mike, they might move some of those guys over to Will just for added competition. They're so strong in the front 7. And again, I think that goes into and plays into K-State's favor with what the Big 12 is this year. I saw some kind of graphic the other day on Twitter that 8 of the top, I want to say 25 running backs are in the Big 12 in terms of returning yardage. That plays right into K-State's strength as a defense in that front 7. So secondary's pretty strong too. And they've got a lot of talent and probably the most speed and athleticism they've had back there in quite some time. But it all hinges on how good that front 7 is going to be. And we think it'll be pretty strong.
Gotcha. Give me something here, Ryan, that K-State fans, coaches, players, everybody, that they should, and I don't want to say necessarily worried about, but a concern that would concern you, because it sounds like K-State's got some depth. That's always been the issue in years past, is that the injury bug, if it happens, the season could go downhill from what we are expecting because they didn't have the depth. Well, it doesn't necessarily sound like that's a problem right now. So what are maybe a pitfall that K-State might fall into this season that people should keep an eye on?
Well, obviously, I think the low-hanging fruit would be, again, an Avery Johnson injury.
Right.
Because, again, I don't suspect that he's going to fall drastically short of expectations. Again, maybe he's not a Heisman contender, but I'm hard-pressed to think that he will just completely, be in the gutter, right? I think he'll be pretty darn good. Offensive line, again, low-hanging fruit, right? But again, I'm going to trust that Connor Riley's going to get that group right, and he's got the pieces. So for me, the 2 positions that I'm going to be watching closest as we get into the non-con here right out of the gate is wide receiver and cornerback. And here's why for me. With wide receiver, probably the most talent they've had, just pure skills in quite some time, but a lot of guys that, which way are they going to go? With Jace Brown, is he going to make the move from the freshman year we saw where he becomes a staple in the Big 12 and a name that everybody knows? Or does he hit a sophomore slump now that people have some tape on him?
Right.
Keegan Johnson, really talented player, a guy that they continue to rave about in fall camp, that this is kind of the best version of Keegan Johnson that they've seen since he got to K-State, maybe even since he got to the college scene at Iowa. But he's constantly struggled with injuries. He's healthy now. Will he be, healthy throughout the season?
Right.
Dante Cephas is a guy that big name transfer from Penn State, didn't really get it done at Penn State, comes to Kansas State. And I'll be honest, Brian, I haven't heard a ton of buzz about Dante Cephas. The thing that everybody keeps saying is the greatest trait about Dante Cephas is the experience that he's bringing to the room. It's not exactly what you want to hear if you're a fan.
No.
You want to hear, man, this guy is unbelievable. You should have seen the play he was making yesterday. So the verdict's still out on him. Trey Spivey, another guy that sounds like they're really excited about, we haven't seen enough of. So is that room going to live up to the hype? Are they going to help Avery Johnson and his progression and this offense's progression vertically? And then on the opposite side of the ball, it's cornerback. I am off the boat now of being concerned about Keenan Garber and Jacob Parrish, because everyone is talking about how much better these guys are and how dominant they've been. And so when you hear from that many, mouths and that many sources, it's like, okay, these guys are going to be fine.
Right.
But behind them, Brian, if an injury comes to Jacob Parrish, if an injury comes to Keenan Garber, where they're missing substantial time, the staff is confident in the progression they've seen from Justice James, but a guy that hadn't played a whole lot of football, right? And beyond that, they still haven't figured out who's going to be the fourth. So again, on one end, glass half full, it shows they've got a lot of guys that are good enough to compete for that spot. On the other hand, none of them are standing out. Is it Jordan Dunbar? Is it Kenigel Thomas? Is it Donovan McIntosh? And are you really comfortable with one of those guys coming in playing big time snaps? Those are two spots to me. Cornerback, they've got to stay healthy. And wide receiver, again, they've got to stay healthy and they've got to live up to the billing.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, that's been a lot of the K-State fans have kind of been a little bit disappointed in the wide receiver play over the past several years. And hopefully it can get back to, because Kansas State was known as having explosive players. I mean, we could go on and on down the list. They got to get back to that this season. It can't just be out of the running game. They got to be able to throw the ball and throw it down the field.
Yes.
That's the thing. Throw the ball down the field. So two more questions. I'll get you out of here, Ryan. First one is there a game that you would say, I don't necessarily want to pigeonhole you into saying defines the season, but is there a game on K-State's schedule right now that, they play this game, they win the game, and you're thinking, you know what, K-State's got something here?
Well, I think, again, kind of low-hanging fruit would be that Friday night against Arizona.
Right.
I obviously Tulane is going to be an interesting matchup just because it's the first road game, that New Orleans heat. But something tells me the team's just going to be up for that game, knowing what happened 2 years ago in Manhattan. And I know things are different, but so coming back on that Friday night against Arizona, you have a rare non-con matchup that's going to tell you an awful lot about how the Big 12 hierarchy is going to play out. So I think that's the easy one. But for me, I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm looking at that game on October 19th in Morgantown against West Virginia.
Yeah.
And here's why, because where it's placed in the season schedule for me, that is in the heart of kind of a defining stretch for Kansas State. They come out of the non-con and they'll go to BYU, which will be a kind of a tough test in terms of a place they've never been, team they've never seen, the altitude, all those things. But then they've got a 4-week stretch of Oklahoma State at home, at Colorado, at West Virginia, and then home for a huge rivalry game against KU. Colorado is a team, to me, I'm not buying the hype, but again, they do have the individuals on the roster. Whether they kind of come together is the question that we're all waiting to see. But again, you're going into that altitude. You're coming off of a game against Oklahoma State that will be challenging. Brian, you and I know, watching Big 12 football long enough, Oklahoma State is always going to be a physical game.
Absolutely.
That's a game that you're going to need the ice tub for a couple days afterwards.
Yep.
So again, then you go into the altitude, and then you come back from Colorado and make, one of the longer road trips that you'll have all year to kind of a scary roster right now for Neil Brown, a team that, is kind of lurking there, right? Like, could they be a top 25 team? Potentially. Right. We'll see kind of how they shape up in their non-con, which is really strong. But again, that just seems like one of those trap games. You're coming off Colorado. There'll be all the hype, all the talk about K-State versus Dion. Then you got to go to Morgantown and keep the blinders on to not look forward at KU.
Right.
Morgantown, for me, that West Virginia game is going to be an enormous one for K-State to stay focused, stay locked in, and get out of there with a win.
Absolutely. The best thing for K-State that could happen is West Virginia beats Penn State. West Virginia beats Penn State. That'll have K-State. That'll have their attention, because you're right of how the schedule gets set up and how it is. Yeah, it technically it's a trap game, or it could be classified as that. Although I'm buying into West Virginia this year. Yeah. I think West Virginia is going to have something this year. They had it last year, and I know their schedule helped them, but I think they're better this year.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, for K-State, I think the best thing that could happen for K-State in that game is that West Virginia beats Penn State. I don't know if they will, or even if they play them really, really tough. That would be the best thing that could happen, because then it's like, well, hold on a second. We're going to West Virginia. We already know it's a tough place to play, and they're really good.
Yep.
So that would be the best thing. Last question to get you out of here, Ryan. What would it look like for K-State this year, a successful season? Is it, and not necessarily, you can put a number of wins on there, but what would be a successful season, not only just in your mind, but in the coach's mind, fans' mind, players' mind? What would be a successful season for K-State? Is it the Big 12 championship or bust? Or is it, 8, 9 wins? Because 7, I already know that's not going to be acceptable. 8 is probably not either.
No.
But what would be acceptable for K-State as a successful season?
Yeah, I'm usually the pessimist of our group, right? And even I'm like, hard pressed to see like where this season they should hit 9 wins. And I think for the majority of the fan base, it's double-digit wins or bust. And for even another section of the fan base, it's we better have our butts in the Big 12 title game. So, for me, I look more big picture. I think the minimum should be 9 wins to me. But for me, it's less about making the college football playoff this year, being in the Big 12 title game. I think if you get to 9 wins, it can be a success if within those 9 wins you're playing some of your best ball down the stretch, and you're implementing as many of the 2, I don't want to say 3 deep, but 2 deep guys as possible. Because I'm kind of gonna go out on the fence here a little bit, because everybody's focused on 2024. I'm buying into K-State 2025, Brian. Not that I don't buy into 24.
Sure.
I feel like this is just kind of, this is the benchmark year. This is kind of the year that sets everything off. So if they go nuts this year, I'm going to be ecstatic going into next year. But I think about 2025, and it's like a year older Avery Johnson, a year older Dylan Edwards. You'll lose some guys like Austin Moore and Marquise Siegel, but you're bringing back VJ Payne as a senior. You've got all these young guys that they are ecstatic about. As long as K-State can get their feet wet and still hit 9, maybe 10 wins, to me, we're rolling at that point. Right. And again, yes, you'd love to see them in the Big 12 title. Yes, you'd love to see them in the college football playoff. But for me, it's about hitting 9 wins, establishing that you're kind of, what would that put you, Brian? Maybe top 4 of the Big 12.
Easily.
You have to be top 5. That's a bar minimum for me. But as long as we're seeing some progress from that sophomore class and getting some of these redshirt freshmen more integrated, to me, it's a success if you're top 4, 9 wins, and you're seeing a lot of good things from either your young starters, underclassmen starters, and or some of that 2D. If you're seeing Asa Newsom get in there and being productive, you're seeing Jordan Allen get in there and be productive, then to me, it's a success. That's probably not a happy answer for the K-State fan base, but to me, that's a monstrous success, because that momentum that you can carry into 2025 will be absolutely enormous. And if you thought expectations were big this year, they will be huge in 25.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ryan, again for taking the time to join us today. Big 12 Insiders, again, our fall preview, looking at Kansas State. Thank you. We'll have you back on again, as always. As much as you can come on, my man, we will have you back. So we appreciate you giving us time today.
Let's do it, Brian. Looking forward to it.
All righty.